The national portion of the real estate exam frequently tests your knowledge of the Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act of 1992, specifically focusing on the 1978 cutoff year. If a residential property was built before 1978, federal law mandates specific disclosures that you as an agent are responsible for facilitating. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a strict federal requirement designed to protect buyers and tenants from lead poisoning. On the exam, you will likely see questions asking about the exact year this law applies to. So remember that any home built prior to 1978 triggers these requirements. A common trap involves the 1978 date itself. If a question asks about a home built in exactly 1978, the disclosure rules generally do not apply because the law targets pre-1978 construction. One of the primary requirements is that sellers and landlords must provide the EPA-approved pamphlet titled "Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home." You should expect a question asking what specific document must be handed over. In addition to the pamphlet, sellers must disclose any known presence of lead-based paint. It is crucial to distinguish between known presence and required testing. The law does not require sellers to conduct new tests or to remove lead paint. It only requires them to disclose what they already know. If they have no knowledge and no records, they simply state that on the disclosure form. Another critical point for the exam is the 10-day inspection period. By law, buyers must be given a 10-day window to conduct a lead-based paint inspection or risk assessment at their own expense. However, the exam might try to trick you by asking if this period is mandatory. While the opportunity must be offered, the buyer has the right to waive this inspection period in writing. As an agent, your role is pivotal. The law specifically places the burden on real estate agents to ensure that sellers and landlords comply with these regulations. If a seller fails to disclose, the agent can be held liable if they knew about the failure and did nothing. Let's look at a concrete example you might encounter. Suppose you are listing a house built in 1965. The seller tells you they have never tested for lead and have no idea if it exists. On the exam, the correct action is for the seller to provide the lead-based paint disclosure form, checking the box that says they have no knowledge. Provide the EPA pamphlet and give the buyer the 10-day right to inspect. The trap here is thinking the seller must go out and hire an inspector because the house is old. They do not. They just have to be honest about their lack of knowledge. To remember the cutoff year and the core requirements, use the phrase "78 is the lead-free date." This reminds you that 1978 is the magic number. If the home is older than that date, you must disclose. Provide the pamphlet and allow for the 10-day window. Remember that these rules apply to both sales and leases of residential property. If the question asks about a commercial warehouse built in 1950, these specific federal lead-based paint disclosure rules do not apply because the Act focuses on residential housing where children might reside. The law defines these properties as target housing. Target housing includes most private housing, public housing, and housing receiving federal assistance built before 1978. There are a few exceptions that the exam might use to confuse you, such as housing for the elderly or persons with disabilities, provided that no children under the age of 6 reside there. Another exception is zero-bedroom dwellings like lofts or efficiency apartments. If you see a question about a studio apartment built in 1960, the lead-based paint disclosure may not be required under the zero-bedroom exemption. Furthermore, the exam often tests the timeline of when these disclosures must occur. They must happen before the buyer or tenant becomes obligated under a contract. You cannot wait until the closing table to hand over the pamphlet. If the disclosure happens after the contract is signed, the buyer may have the right to back out. Fines for non-compliance are heavy, often exceeding $16,000 per violation. This high-stakes reality is why the exam focuses so heavily on the agent's duty to inform the seller of their obligations. Even if you are the buyer's agent, you must ensure the seller's agent has provided the necessary documents to your client. Finally, remember that lead-based paint records must be kept for 3 years from the completion of the sale or the beginning of the lease. If you see a question about record retention, 3 years is your target number for lead-based paint compliance records.